Do you remember when Donald Trump launched this? It is his own cryptocurrency meme coin named after himself, and it seems to have helped make the president more than $1 billion. The White House denies that he is profiting from the presidency. So we're going to talk about that, plus a big week of rulings in the US Supreme Court, what that means for Donald Trump and the White House on this episode of Newscast. Hello, it's James in the Newscast studio.
And it is Alex in the Westminster studio. And we are joined by Gary O'Donoghue, Chief North America Correspondent. Hey, Gary.
Hello to you, two of my favourite people, obviously.
The feeling is mutual, of course. So, Gary, we're going to talk in a minute about the President's Week in the Supreme Court because there's been a fair bit going on. But first, before we get to that, overnight we've had the President's Mandatory Financial Report for 2025. So this is something that every president has to publish with their kind of financial dealings in it. And this one about President Trump showed that he made more than $1 billion last year from business dealings in cryptocurrency. Can you just talk us through it? What was in it, what it said, what the headlines were?
Yeah, it's kind of mind-boggling. In fact, overall, he made over $2 billion while being president last year. But $1.4 billion of that came from various aspects of his ventures into cryptocurrencies. Now, a few years ago, Donald Trump dismissed cryptocurrency as a place for scammers, a place for illegal activity, a place for drug dealers, but he's utterly embraced it since just before the last election. And essentially what's happened here is he set up, and his family set up an organization called World Liberty Financial. That itself issues cryptocurrency tokens. There were various other things that they did, including launching a meme coin, the Trump meme coin. It's a sort of collectible Trump coin. The vast profits from which go to Donald Trump and his family, but which has now plummeted more than 90% since its high point. So it's now under $2. At one point, it was $75, and the people who have shouldered that loss are retail investors, or retail buyers, if you like. So he's made about $600 million from the meme coin. He's made hundreds of millions more from the sale of that stake in World Liberty Financial, and he's made a bunch of money on the cryptocurrency issued by World Liberty Financial. So he's doing pretty well. I mean, these are revenue figures, so we don't necessarily know what the profits are, but you can, I think, probably assume that the profits are pretty hefty. And of course, now this is his, looks like his biggest earner by some way, not just property and running hotels.
Presumably, I mean, obviously, this raises, at the very least, questions about ethics, questions about his relationship with some nations, including the United Arab Emirates, which is involved in some of these ventures, questions about who he has doing certain jobs, given that Steve Witkoff, his key envoy, special envoy, is involved in some of these business ventures as well. Gary, what is the debate there in Washington about the ethics of this, and just how unusual is this? I mean, we've just never seen anything like this, have we?
No, we haven't. And I mean, for example, people have connected. There was also a pardon issued to a cryptocurrency, a guy who's incredibly rich, I think one of the richest from cryptocurrency in the autumn, which the Trump organization has some involvement in. There have been other decisions, liberalization of the cryptocurrency market. So he is a player and also a sort of rule maker in this space. And of course, people say, well, that's a conflict of interest. The president in the past said the president can't be subject to rules of conflict of interest. Indeed, the White House spokeswoman, Anna Kelly, has issued a statement recently saying, just denying there's any, conflict of interest whatsoever. So, they just say no. Can I just tell you one tiny anecdote? I remember after the 2016 election, sitting in a hotel room in New York, writing a piece for the BBC about how, there was going to be all sorts of questions about Donald Trump owning the Trump Hotel on Pennsylvania Avenue, just by the White House, the old post office, and also being its landlord. Outrageous. He was the landlord and the leaseholder at the same time. How could that possibly be allowed? I feel that feels quite quaint compared to now.
Yeah, it's kind of extraordinary. And you mentioned that the White House has kind of put out a statement about it. I mean, I'll read what they said in full. So it was from the Deputy Press Secretary, Anna Kelly, who said in this statement that the president had proudly made the US the crypto capital of the world. Neither the president nor his family has ever engaged or will ever engage in conflicts of interest. And it goes on to say, all actions by President Trump and his administration are taken in the best interest of the American people, and any so-called reporters pushing otherwise are recycling the same tired false narrative that Democrats and the legacy media have been pushing for a decade. I mean, Gary, there's the cryptocurrency issue and the questions that you've pointed to that are being debated in Washington. But then there's also other income from real estate and Trump-themed items. You've got branded watches and branded Bibles and trainers and fragrances and goodness knows whatever else. I mean, it seems like there's now a precedent to that anecdote you were mentioning about what did seem quaint compared to what this has revealed about the president's finances, who's like openly embracing that kind of money-making business side of himself, for good or for ill, in the way that people perceive that, in a way that you just haven't seen from previous presidents.
No, I mean, it makes me think that, whatever it was, 50, 60 years ago, Jimmy Carter said he was going to put his peanut farm into a trust so there couldn't be any kind of question about his financial dealings. And you kind of think, yes, things have definitely changed. And I think the reason for that is because, and this is, this will sound slightly banal, I guess, but, and the political scientists have a word for it, and I can't for the life of me remember what it is, but the sort of the point of what's normal has shifted. So the politics have shifted in such a way, and they've pushed the boundaries in such a way that this stuff kind of flows over a little bit. Now, not for everyone, of course, and not for Democrats and for some more independent-minded voters here, but there isn't the level of outrage outside of the places you would normally expect to find it about this kind of thing. So that is a successful political achievement, is it not? If you're in Donald Trump's position and his family's position, that you've made this stuff kind of feel kind of normal.
Yes, and to that, you mentioned the Democrats there. The White House mentioned the Democrats, Gary, in that statement. Are they then not being able to land blows on Donald Trump with this? Do they have a coordinated message? I mean, from what you're saying there, it sounds like they're not really making the political hay that you might imagine they could make with this.
You would have thought, wouldn't you, in a two-party system, that if one end of the seesaw, is having problems, the other end kind of swings up. It doesn't work like that here. Because of the sort of fractured nature of political opinion as opposed to the structure of political parties, it either leads to apathy or for people to go off into sort of fringe activities or fringe beliefs. So no, they're not. And of course, the problem is that they are having their own internal battles, their own internal ideological battles. We saw those victories for Democratic Socialist Party people in primaries in New York this week. There's a tug of war for the heart of the Democratic Party going on, which makes it hard for them to focus on what you might call their real opposition target, because there's so much infighting going on. And that means a unified message is always hard, because one part of the party wants to really focus on, core bread and butter stuff, perhaps. Other parts want to focus on Trump and beating Trump, and all those things come out as a bit of a mush, so they don't really benefit. I mean, obviously in November the midterms will be a real test of this, and that could be their wake-up call ahead of a presidential election in 2 years' time, because everyone, every sort of opposition party in midterms is meant to do well, and the majority in Congress, for example, particularly in the House, is so narrow that if they don't take it, it will be regarded as a massive defeat for them.
So just talking about President Trump and what's been going on this week in the Supreme Court, because it's been a really, really big week in the Supreme Court. And maybe the most significant ruling came on Tuesday when the Supreme Court ruled that babies born in the US have a constitutional right to citizenship. Gary, can you just talk us through what that means and why this was being contested in the first place?
So if you come here as, if you're here as foreigners, and you're a couple, whether you be illegal migrants who have come over the border, whether you be business people who are working here. I mean, the whole spectrum of foreigners here. If you have a baby in the US, that baby is an American straight away, automatically, no arguments. That's what birthright citizenship is. And it's been the case since just after the Civil War. In fact, just after the Civil War in 1868, the constitution was changed to say that everyone born in that way was an American, and it was, as Trump says, rightly designed to ensure that the babies of slaves were citizens in this country. Now, 30 years later, the Supreme Court reaffirmed that in a case completely unrelated to slavery or babies, and it's been the settled law since the end of the 19th century. Trump tried to overturn that. He's railed against what he calls birth tourism. He thinks people are doing it. He calls them anchor babies in a rather offensive way, and he has sought to overturn it and thought he could. And the Supreme Court on this particular occasion, 6-3, because it has this conservative majority, but 3 of them went against him. It said, no, the 14th Amendment protects people, done deal, game over. The only options Trump has is to try and sort of restrict things through congressional sort of acts, and that's, Congress is always gridlocked at the moment. So he does have one option here, which is potentially changing the Constitution. But that's incredibly hard, and it's a non-starter. So the last time an amendment was passed to the Constitution was back in the 1990s, and that was something to do with congressional pay. It wasn't even terribly consequential. Only 8 amendments to the Constitution have been passed in the last 100 years. You need 2/3 of Congress and 3/4 of the states to agree. It's a complete non-starter.
What does this mean for him then, Gary, given how immigration has been central to the president's agenda right from the outset when I was in the States with you and he was actually running for the presidency. He's talked about immigration as being completely central to his political ideology. I mean, this might have been a lot of lawyers regarded trying to overturn birthright citizenship as a real stretch, given, as you say, it goes back to 1868. But what does is this a big blow for him or not then?
Do you know, it's a big PR blow because he was so invested. This was an executive order he signed about 3 hours after he was inaugurated. So it's a big PR blow, but he's been laying the ground a bit for it in the sense that he's been saying he thought he would lose, even though he went there in person to hear the oral arguments. First time a president's ever done that. So there hasn't been the kind of vitriol towards the judges I was expecting that we got, for example, when he was defeated on tariffs. That may yet come, but it hasn't happened yet. I think the more significant measure will be deportations in the long run, because it's proved a lot harder to do that in the kind of crazy numbers, the millions that we were promised. It hasn't kept up with that. The system can't deliver that, and of course, industry and farming has pushed back on that because it relies so much on frankly cheap labor, much of which at times in certain industries is undocumented migrant labor, and they have pushed back very hard on that. So there's not just the practical difficulties of doing that. Now, what you will hear is that it's been a huge success, and this administration and Donald Trump in particular just says black is white, yes is no when asked about these things. But the question is, can the Democrats or anyone else, frankly, land that message at a point in time where it really counts, that all these promises on immigration aren't materializing on the scale they were promised?
You just mentioned there, Gary, that this was an executive order, this order on birthright citizenship. So one of those things in my mind, when we saw President Trump first take office for the second time, and he signed loads of things with a big pen in the Oval Office.
Yeah.
But so that's just President Trump effectively saying, I want this to happen, therefore I'm making an order that this will happen. How does it then get to the court? Do you know what I mean? Does someone have to call it in or challenge it or say, court, have a look at this, please?
Yes, you can, executive orders are subject to judicial review in the way other things are as well. So yes, it was challenged, and usually, a coalition of groups gets together, with money, effectively finds a case, or an individual then in a sense becomes the front of that case. So the detail of the individual case, whilst probably incredibly important to them, is not really central to this. But yeah, that's exactly what happens. These things can be taken up in the courts. They bubble up through the federal courts at the district level. They end up at a sort of a kind of regional appeal court, which all this did. And then, you can appeal right up to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court doesn't have to hear it, but, this was such a central constitutional question that you thought, well, the Supreme Court chooses to punt on this one, then what's it for? But it didn't choose to punt.
Well, it was also that not the only thing, as we mentioned, that the Supreme Court's been up to this week. There have been other significant rulings. Can you give us a quick rundown?
Yeah, quick rundown. So there were a couple involving President Trump's power to fire people in the executive. In other words, you've got this problem in America. The executive is one part of three parts of the governing system, along with Congress and the courts. But the executive also contains these so-called independent agencies. Now, if they're part of the executive, does Trump have the ability to fire people on them, or are they independent? That was one of the things it was deciding. And in one case with the Federal Trade Commission, it agreed with him he could fire someone. But in another case, it said, hang on, you can't fire someone from the Federal Reserve, the central bank, because they hadn't had proper due process, and they sent that back to the court. So they sort of carved out this Federal Reserve case, as opposed to what now will appear the case with other executive agencies, that he can do that. The other big one this week was transgender women playing in women's sports in schools and colleges. And they came down. This wasn't a Trump administration case. This was brought by two states that had bans on transgender women playing in college and school sports. Those bans were upheld. There are similar bans in 25 other states. So they are effectively upheld by that. But they don't impose that on other states that don't have those bans, if that makes sense. So you've got a country where half of the states say, if you're a transgender woman, you can't play in sports for women, and half of the country that doesn't have such a ban. Again, a big example of the cultural divide in this country.
And that wasn't even everything. There was a campaign finance ruling that is broadly regarded as being favourable to the Republicans as well. But we can't get into everything. We cannot get into everything. You've got to go. But I think it's one of the reasons that you have to get out of here so quickly so that you can enjoy the football later. It's 2:20 in the afternoon here in the UK, and England are playing at 5. Are you looking forward to it?
Yes, noon, yeah. I am excited. I'm sad for Scotland, of course, James. Very sad. But
thank you.
I'm no, genuinely. As half Scottish myself, so I am sad for Scotland. But yeah, I'm very excited. Although, I'm not sure that's mirrored in the general population here. I felt utterly underwhelmed by the reaction here to the World Cup, and we'll be cheering along at noon.
Great. Well, thanks very much, Gary. It's lovely to talk to you as always. Thank you. Now we're just going to rewind a little bit, Alex, because on Tuesday, you and I talked with Frank Gardner about the Defence Investment Plan. And we were talking to Frank and Chris about it. And as we were talking, you rightly pointed out that the numbers didn't quite add up. And that's a bit of an understatement because there's quite a big funding gap, a commitment gap here. What have we learned about that this morning? Because Luke Pollard, the Minister for Defence Procurement's been out talking to all the media on what they call the broadcast round, talking about it. Do we know any more about what this gap is and how it might be filled, if at all?
Yeah, well, I think what he did was spell out what we'd identified on Tuesday's episode, really, which was the fact that they've identified where there's so many numbers kicking around about this. I think it's just worth reminding people what the numbers actually are. So what the Prime Minister announced on Tuesday was what he said was £15 billion extra for defence investment, and set out all of the new priorities that the government thought that they needed to focus that money on. And what then kind of emerged was that around 10 billion of that has been found or identified, and part of that's come through other government departments making savings, so things like roads and energy schemes. But there was 4.7 billion that still has to be identified, and that was going to be found or identified in the upcoming budget this year. And obviously, as Prime Minister Keir Starmer is on his way out, that's probably going to fall to the new Prime Minister, most likely to be Andy Burnham, and whoever he picks as his Chancellor. And what we heard from the Defence Minister, Luke Pollard, when he was answering all the questions on this morning, was him effectively saying, yeah, that's got to be identified in the budget. But the argument that I've heard from ministers in government making today is that they say, well, look, this is pretty normal, because actually quite often it's the case when you're setting out spending plans for something that run over a period of time, you'll identify some of the money, and then it will be up to when you're taking big decisions in the round at, for example, a budget time, that you might identify some of the others. And what Downing Street keep pointing to, obviously, is the fact they are spending lots more money, in their view, on defence, and that this is what this investment plan is part of, a kind of uplift and increase in defence spending. But I don't think this is a settled issue, not just because an incoming Burnham premiership will have to relook at this to find more money for defence spending, because there's this promise to increase it over a period of time, as well as the 4.7 billion that hasn't yet been identified in this plan, but also because political opponents and others are saying, well, look, we just don't think this is enough for defence spending. And there was Prime Minister's questions on Wednesday lunchtime, and that is exactly what Kemi Badenoch, the leader of the Conservative Party, pressed the Prime Minister really hard on.
He says that he's delivering this outside the budget. That's right, it should have been in the last budget. The Strategic Defence Review was published last year. It should have been in the last budget, not the next budget. The intelligence assessment that he himself has said we have says there could be an attack on NATO by 2030. But this plan doesn't deliver until after that. £5 billion is missing from his plan. It also relies on £11 billion of unidentified savings. The plan has unravelled. It is a total dereliction of duty, and I'm not the only one who thinks so. The Times newspaper said today the Prime Minister's legacy... well, why don't we wait and see what they said? That the Prime Minister's legacy is betrayal, failure and vulnerability, and that's one of the nicer headlines. So I will ask again, because he didn't answer the question, Mr. Speaker, did the member for Makerfield know that he was going to have to find £5 billion for the Prime Minister's plan?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, when I became Prime Minister 2 years ago, this country spent £54 billion a year on defence. Because of the decisions we've taken, that will rise to £80 billion a year by 2029. That is a real terms increase of 27%, transforming our armed forces. And we're not going to take any lectures from the party opposite. They cut defence spending. They hollowed out the armed forces. That's what their Defence Secretary admitted that's what they did. They don't like it. They won't defend their record, Mr. Speaker, because they can't. They won't apologise for it, because they have to admit what we all know, it's a total failure. They just try to pretend the 14 years they were in power never really happened. We're in power, we've record investment in defence and security. I'm proud of this Labour government, and any Labour Prime Minister would stand behind this plan.
I was really struck by the tone and the manner, Alex, of the Prime Minister's answers to Kemi Badenoch there, in terms of defending his legacy, and almost the backbench Labour MPs cheering his legacy. And I was thinking as they were doing it, but you've sacked this guy, basically. It's quite the contrast, isn't it?
It's kind of remarkable, isn't it? Like, so I thought exactly the same. So you heard Keir Starmer talking again and again through Prime Minister's questions about my record, and, you know, I'm proud to defend my record. And I do think that is a little bit of legacy building, and that's, you know, that is what Prime Ministers and other ministers, when they leave office or when they know they're leaving office, often will do, is try and shape how history might see them. And so we have heard a bit of that from Keir Starmer, and I think we'll continue to hear a bit of that from Keir Starmer, because he's got a couple of weeks yet, obviously, before he actually leaves Downing Street, to try and cement what he would see as his legacy, or the legacy of his period in office. But you are right again, that the reason he's leaving is because Labour MPs effectively, outwardly and publicly said that they didn't really want him as the leader anymore. So it is this kind of strange space that we're in at the moment, where Keir Starmer is suddenly getting a lot of support from his backbenchers, when not so long ago it was those very same backbenchers that were calling for him to go to make room for someone else. It's an odd little period in politics, this
really
window, is it not?
It's such an odd time. I'll tell you one other thing that occurred to me, Alex, reflecting on Tuesday's episode that we were talking about defence, is that there seems to be such a mainstream consensus now in favour of increased defence and security spending. And I just wonder whether the voices of the people in this country who aren't convinced by that are not really being very loudly heard at the moment.
Well, so at Westminster, I think what you've seen developing between some of the bigger parties in Westminster, so the Conservatives, Labour, the Liberal Democrats, they are all very much talking about the need to increase defence spending. Nobody is really moving away from that position, and Reform UK actually in the mix as well. I think where there are real points of difference between them is how you get there. So, for example, you've got Reform UK, the Conservatives, suggesting you need to look at welfare. You've got the Liberal Democrats talking about defence bonds to try and raise money for defence spending. You've got the Labour government pointing to what it set out yesterday, which is, of course, the Defence Investment Plan. And then you've got the Greens as well. And interestingly, Ellie Chowns, who is the Green Party's Westminster leader, she'd actually spoke in the debate that there was in the House of Commons on Tuesday about defence spending. And the point she was making, she put this to the current Defence Secretary Dan Jarvis, was about pouring billions of good money after bad into what she called the black hole of Cold War technology instead of investing in security. So that's obviously a reference to the nuclear deterrent. So I think that point of difference comes from, if we think there does need to be an increase in security, where do you spend the money, not just how do you raise the money? So I think while people recognise that the nature of the threat the UK is facing has changed after Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine, after the wars we've seen in the Middle East, and most at Westminster would say, yeah, look, we think that we do need to invest in our defence and security. There are questions about how you fund it and even potentially how you spend it.
Yeah, and questions in Scotland, Alex, particularly about that nuclear weapons programme, the UK's nuclear weapons programme, because the UK government yesterday was talking about more money going into that, to the next generation of nuclear weapons, to improving conditions at the naval base just off the Clyde, where the UK's nuclear weapons and the submarines that carry them are based. And there's been a lot of complaints about conditions there, actually. But the Scottish National Party I have for many years, as you know, opposed the presence of nuclear weapons, UK having nuclear weapons at all, and the presence in Scotland. Their long-term idealistic vision for Scotland, in their view, is that Scotland would be independent and wouldn't have any nuclear weapons. So I think this debate is going to continue on those terms as well, in Scotland particularly, if it isn't necessarily happening at a UK level. But that's for another day. I also have a question to ask you, Alex, because yesterday when we went away from the Newscast studio, you were off to do some more work on another programme. You said you were going to be working late into the evening, and I was worried about you. And then I came in this morning and you were on the television filling in for Vicky on Politics Live. So you're everywhere. How was Politics Live? How was the defence spending chat there?
Yeah, it's been a busy run, you know.
You're so hardworking.
No, everybody's hardworking, James. Come on, you yourself are pretty hardworking. Let's not make any bones about it. But yeah, no, Politics Live is just filling in a very, very short term for Vicky Young, who's having just a couple of days off. And it was a lively one today, I can tell you, around defence spending, because exactly as Kemi Badenoch was doing during Prime Minister's questions, I think this is something Conservatives, for their own reasons, are very keen to press on. So I expect they're going to want to keep this conversation going. And in response then, what you get is Labour pointing the finger at the Conservatives' record in government. So it all becomes very politically heated when it comes to the defence debate. And yeah, I mean, I suspect that this is going to be a conversation that we'll keep on having, albeit with a different Prime Minister at the helm in just a couple of weeks from now, right?
Yes, we can never have too much Alex Forsyth. That is the lesson we have learned.
I don't know about that.
Alex, thank you.
Pleasure
nice to be here with you as always. That's all, isn't it, from this episode of Newscast?
And we'll be back with another one soon. Bye.